everyone. Super excited for today's episode. We have a special guest. Jared Posey is going to be here helping us to dig deeper into what's going on in a continuation of some of the conversations that we've had relating to education, public school education, education in general of kids in our modern times. And I won't take up more than that. That's the intro. And then hopefully we'll get into some of what we think the future of education is here as we get into it with Jared. So I'll toss it over to you, Jared, and maybe a little intro background on you, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah. So, my name is Jared, and I do a few things. A tour boat captain, but mostly I'm kind of working with teens right now. So, an educator with the Salish Sea School. That's a nonprofit here in Washington State. And then I'm starting up my own life coaching business as well to help teens kind of figure out their future, create a future that lights them up, and find both success and meaning.
Awesome. Well, that sounds
Yeah,
awesome, Jared.
I'll
Looking
kind
forward
of
to.
jump in here. I want to talk a little bit about how I found Jared. So I had posted a comment on LinkedIn on a post by Jonathan Haidt, and today and I have talked a lot about Jonathan Haidt and his books, The Righteous Mind and The Anxious Generation. And I believe it was a comment by someone else who said, all this stuff is great about, having kids avoid smartphones and all this stuff, but how do you get your teen to listen, right? And I kind of just reiterated that, like, yeah, it would be great if there'd be some way for the teen or to get our kids to listen. And now I have a 13-year-old, and then Jared, you responded back to that comment saying, "Stay tuned, I'm going to put something together," and I thought that was fantastic. And that was kind of my introduction to you. And yeah, I mean, you came back within, I think it was like 24 hours or maybe even less, with a video. And I did have my son watch it, and yeah, it was great. He didn't complain about it, so that was a good sign. But yeah, that was our introduction to Jared, and that's when I reached out to you, and I thought you'd be a great guest for our podcast. So thanks for that.
Yeah. No. That was a cool moment. I mean, I wasn't. A lot of times on social media, people are like trying to set up their thing, like, oh, this will lead to a lead or an offer. I was just like, that sounds like somebody needs help. Like, that's not exactly what I want to do, but challenge accepted. And so I just thought, yeah, why not? Like, it'll take me 10 minutes, and maybe I spent 30, but yeah, that was a really cool moment. And the not
Yeah,
complaining,
definitely.
I think, is like the highest flattery from a teen, right? Yeah.
He watched the whole thing with me out of the room. I let him watch it by himself, and yeah, he didn't complain. So that was I took that as a positive.
Yeah.
What did the what was the message? What was the takeaway?
I don't know. I didn't really press him on it because I didn't want to like push it too much, because I feel like if I started talking to him about it, then he would, turn away from the message almost. But yeah, I think he watched the whole thing, and I think Jared, it was about, I remember watching it back then, but this is a couple of months ago now. But yeah, I think the main point of the message was, hey, your parents are looking out for your best interest, and there's a reason why they don't want you to have smartphones and all this and be on social media and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it was I think a little bit of a sunk in, but who knows?
Yeah, I think that's always tricky with kids. And, I know, Jared, you spend time with teens. I have two. Chirag has one. Getting validation, confirmation, some indication that the messages, the lessons, whether direct or subtle or indirect, just observing the actions that they see their parents and others in the world performing. Like, how do you know we're on the right track? Like, how do you validate that what your message is, the way that you've crafted, like, these are the things that I'm focused on, instilling in the children that I work with? Like, how do you know what's the right message? Like,
Yeah.
how do you frame that?
Yeah. It's a great question, because I don't think that you can tell most of the time. So I try to not try to decipher it all the time. I try to get into the heads and hearts of teens and really understand who they are, how they see the world. And then I try to act from that place, but I don't try to interpret every result or count up every win or loss, because you can just kind of go crazy, right? You have to, I think, have a confidence in yourself. And I think it comes through deep empathy, through deep listening, through deep knowing. And if you're coming from that place, you just have to believe in what you're doing. I mean, you're always adjusting and tinkering, as you go along, but you can't tell really. I mean, you might get some subtle clues, like you said, not complaining or nodding their head, or you might notice they're really enraptured. But a lot of times I'll be thinking, man, I don't know if they're really into this, right? I'll be in a school, in a classroom and talking, and I'm thinking, I'm not really into this. Like, I had this time where a friend had their kid in one of the classes, like they have a teen now. And I thought, okay, I don't know if that went super well, I saw them later that night. They're like, he was just so lit up. Like, oh my God, like he's never talked about school the way he talked about school coming home that day. Like, he would not shut up about it. And he wants to travel and he wants to. So yeah, I think that we really have to trust in ourselves, and we have to just be planters of seeds and allow them to germinate how they will. We're not going to control it. We have to trust.
I
Yeah, I
took
mean, I
a
think that's so true. And there's also, I think there's something, especially with teenage boys, right, where they don't want to show their emotions. And I think
Hmm.
it's a societal thing, I think. And yeah, so you kind of just have to trust that the seeds you're planting will, like you said, will germinate, and not to push it. I have so much trouble with this. Like, I try to push it, like I have to really fight hard to not, just let it be at the seed and not push it, and making sure the message is getting through. And I think that does more harm than good, at least that I've noticed.
Yeah, and I recently came across a little wisdom bomb from Seth Godin. He said, "Don't steal the revelation." Right.
Mhm.
So oftentimes we, as the older people, want to come in and say, "Hey, like here's this. Like, man, I spent a lot of years struggling, and here's this nice, pretty insight. Let me just give this to you, right?" And then you can just plug that in, and boom, like I just saved you so much, right? And it's like we can't co-opt their revelation, their insight, their process, their journey. Like, we can't steal their fate, right? We can't control their fate. And so I love that idea of like not stealing the revelation, but allowing for the conditions where that revelation will occur within themselves, and for them not to just hear their voice, but for their voice to emerge.
It's such an interesting dynamic just based off of both of those stories, because you can appreciate how difficult it is to not steal it, because I feel like, just as we described, we're so hungry for validation that we're on the right track with them, because we get so little. And if you don't have that, I loved your answer, because you have to be confident. You have to really believe that you don't need their validation to know that you're a good person and you're instilling these things in the right way. And if you go in with not needing them to validate that, hey, what we're doing, the way our approach is going to help these kids, then you do allow the kid to enjoy the revelation and not steal it. As you said, I love that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I don't know, man. I
Yeah.
struggle with it. It's tough, right?
Yeah. And I think that it reminds me of something that is kind of at the heart of a lot of adult interactions with teens, and that is desperation, right? There is a loving desperation at the heart of many of our interactions, right? And I totally understand it. I mean, you look at where they are in life, and it feels like it's so tricky, and you don't want them to lose themselves, and you know what is going on in the world of teens today, and it's challenging and it's confusing, and we so desperately want them to be okay. We want them to do well. And so it's very loving, but it's like that desperation to a teen is, like they're just so allergic to that, right? Like they do not want anything to do with that, because it feels controlling. It feels like at a time when they're trying to create their own space, create their own journey. It kind of feels like, man, here's this force that has always been here, which I love and I respect, and I do want to listen to, I do want to hear from, but I don't want to feel controlled, because I'm starting to feel this control, this self-control emerge within me, and it feels right. And developmentally, it is right. So we have to always be kind of understanding developmentally, like what they're doing, like they're carving out their identity, they're carving out themselves, and like that's what they should be doing. And so we have to take a new role as they get into adolescence.
Oh, that's so spot on. And I feel like as parents, it's hard to know when to switch. It's hard to know when to switch and when your child is ready to go into that next phase where we don't steal their, enlightenment. And we are like, I think, taught at a younger age. When I still remember taking a parenting class, and it's like positive reinforcement. And when they, pick up a block and they put it in the right square or they put it in the right circle, you celebrate and you cheer them on. And that same model clearly does not work in the teenage years. Like they need some positive affirmation, but if you are over indexing on the positive affirmation, you steal that enlightenment that they get. And so I think that's part of the complexity, is finding what are the new models that are going to break through with putting lessons and instilling values and educating children as they go through the different phases of growing up, and knowing when to switch and knowing which tools to use when. I think is super fascinating. And I know we spent a lot of, we've been talking about teens, but I think even as from the parents' perspective, it's being thoughtful about how we need to evolve. And even within education, how as an educator you need to evolve, and it's different from elementary, middle, and high school. And it's not just like the standard classroom doesn't really change across those 12 years, right? Like they're still sitting in chairs, they're still listening to a teacher in a classroom, almost like a formula, it's a formula that we follow, and we're beholden on the teachers to start changing it up. So I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the classroom size, but how do you think that impacts like kind of the stuff that we struggle with as parents, the way that our children are growing up within the school system, and then balancing how we continue to put, instill good values that we want them to be good citizens in the world?
Yeah, I mean, first I just want to address like the how do we know when to change up our tactics a bit, right? For one, I think if we're messing up, they're going to let us know. So if we're not doing the right approach, they're going to communicate that either verbally or non-verbally. And that gets, I think, to the essence of the issue, which is that we have to listen, right? Listening is just at the core of how we can best serve probably all people, but especially teens. Like they need to have agency and they need to have a voice, and they need us to understand them. They don't need us to tell them how to feel or tell them what to think or what to do. They do want our guidance, but they want us to become more partners. And I think that comes through listening. As far as the education system goes, I mean, I think that teachers also can benefit from that same practice of listening, because you're right. I mean, K through 12, it doesn't really change. And what's interesting is like we used to have rites of passages, and there was a clear transition into adulthood where youth would demonstrate their skills, they would demonstrate their capacity, they would demonstrate their adultness to their community, and they would be seen as adults, and then they would go out into the world. And we just don't have any sort of clean process that way. So I would love to see high school shift to look like a different experience. And what does that look like? I don't know. I mean, everything is changing, and I think that we're definitely at a transitional moment. But I do think that we need to have schooling become less about information and more about experience, more about skills, more about being truly relevant to the way the world is, right? There's that stereotype of a kid being like, why are we doing this? Am I going to use this in life? And typically the response is like, hey, like just do your work, right? And we kind of expected obedience, and we expected like, hey, just, work hard, right? Just trust me and work hard. And I think that for this generation, that's just not going to work. That is not a winning message. And so I don't know. I'm excited to explore what education can be, because I don't think that where we're at is at all going to serve where we need to get to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I also think there's, in this new age of AI, right? Like, I'm gonna bring it up because it's like, prevalent in
Please,
our
yep.
society now.
It's the elephant in the room, yeah.
Yeah. And where in the past, like when we were growing up, like rote knowledge and, just remembering things was part of education. I obviously don't think that's relevant anymore. And I think, do you think that, almost teaching kids to learn how to learn will be important and also kind of spark curiosity? Because in a world where you can get any knowledge you want at your fingertips at any moment, I think that curiosity and always being curious and wanting to learn and seeing learning as a lifelong pursuit rather than something you do in school and you're done with, do you think that will be kind of more relevant and more important as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think and hope so. I feel like, there's that old quote, education is not, it's the lighting of a match, not the filling of a pail, right? And I think for a long time, we've just tried to fill up that bucket, just put as much information into these young people as we can, and that's going to prepare them. And I think that all of that was well intentioned, but I think that a lot of learning was snuffed out of a lot of young people at an early age. And so, a lot of people don't become lifelong learners because they associate learning with work and drudgery. And it just is it's not a beautiful self-evolution. It's sort of this like adult agenda that's kind of, you know, handed down on you. So I think, yeah, learning, there's a lot, I feel like, and AI is sort of the great catalyst for change that we're going to see. I mean, we've been noticing, of course, for decades that the education system's broken, that, like people within it, like I'm not trying to criticize educators who I think are just amazing human beings doing really selfless work. And like, if you've worked in the school system, you'll have a lot of respect, right, for those individuals. But I think that, yeah, information, like you said, is going to be just easily available. I think what is going to become more important is curating that information. So there's like information chaos and information overload now. And so we have to understand what to do in this sea of information. But yeah, we also have to reassess, what does learning mean? What is education for? We have to think about things in a different way. We have to create flexibility and adaptability, because like one thing for sure that we know is like my kids are 8 and 5, and like their teachers don't know what world they're preparing my sons for. They don't know, like none of us do. Like we are trying to educate for a world we can't exactly predict or foresee. And so it has to be with flexibility and adaptability and resilience at the heart of all of that. But yeah, I think that, we could see education become a lot more personalized through AI. I like Saul Khan's TED Talk where he talks about like, imagine every student having a personalized tutor and every teacher having a personalized teaching assistant. I like a lot of the promise that we have. And I'm not like super pro AI. I'm not super anti AI. I see the positives and the negatives, and I'm just kind of seeing where this goes. But I do think that we should be trying to create visions in our head of what we want education to look like, and talking collaboratively and trying to nudge things in that direction. Because obviously there's a lot of powerful forces, these, big tech companies who are pulling a lot of strings, but we also, as a block of consumers or as the public, I mean, we have a lot of stake and we have a lot of voice collectively.
Oh man, so many golden nuggets there, Jared. At least two that I want to hit on. One is, I hear a lot when we've spoken to others about what are the skills that we're trying to teach within the education system. And we've heard things like instilling good values and instilling critical thinking, because those are going to be critical components. What you dropped of flexibility and adaptability, I think, is also something that I haven't heard as many people talking about, of teaching children how to do those things. Those are skills that need to be learned and emphasized and taught within children, especially given the uncertainty that we all admit and collectively see in the future. The second thing that I thought of is a responsibility that we as the adults, as where we are in our phase of life, have to ensure we shape the future in a way that is beneficial for our children and the next generation. It's not the children's responsibility to shape the future. It's our responsibility to lay the groundwork and the foundation to shape what future they are going to be going into. We're right at the middle of connecting those two dots. So I feel like there isn't enough of pride and accountability and ownership that we all have in doing that. And I think some of the work that we're doing on this podcast and conversations like we're having with you are moving us in that direction. And I guess it's a rally cry from me that, and get your perspective of, do you think we need to do more of this? Is this our responsibility? And if so, how do we get a larger focus on an effort like this?
Yeah. I think that there's a well-meaning thing that we say to young people a lot, which is like, hey, the future is yours. The future is up to you. And I hate that, right? Like, how much pressure is that to put on young people? And it's kind of a cop-out too, right? It's like all of these generations who helped create this world, we're still going to be here for decades, but we'll just pass it to you now. Like, we're just going to put responsibility in your lap. I think we all, for as long as we're alive, need to be invested in how young people are coming into this world. I don't care if you're 95, like, I want you invested. I want all hands on deck, right? Because look at the statistics, look at where young people are. That's not just a crisis for that generation, that is a crisis for all generations. So I will echo your rallying cry, because if we're not in the trenches fighting for these kids, if we're not giving them a bigger vision, something to believe in, something to step into, somebody else will. And guess what? It's not going to be who we want it to be, right? There's a reason why gangs and terrorist organizations are really good at recruiting young people. It's because they give them a place that, like, hey, you matter, you belong, I have a vision for you. Like, it's an attractive thing to be wanted, right? And a lot of times we as adults will say, well, I don't really work with teens, or I don't really work with kids. Or, I like teachers. I'm glad that they're doing a good job. It's like, no, like, we are all, I don't care if you don't have kids. I don't care if you don't work with kids. We are all in this fight together. And if we're not fighting it, we're losing it.
Well, I
Beautiful.
love how you frame that.
That was touching.
You always think, hey, how can gangs and terrorist organizations so easily sway kids? But when you frame it like that, where they give them kind of a purpose and a vision of what their life could be, I could see how that could be, especially for someone who's still developmentally, immature, that could really hold sway.
Yeah, I mean,
Nature
they're
hates a
looking for
vacuum, right?
identity. What'd you
Yeah.
say?
Oh, sorry, Jared. I was just throwing
No.
like echoing, like, nature hates a vacuum, to your point.
Right.
Like, that's a
Absolutely.
great quote, right? Like, if we're not filling the heads with what we believe are good choices, good values, all of that, then, the vacuum will be filled, to your point of other
Yeah.
factors.
Yeah. I mean, they're looking for identity. They're looking for answers. They're looking for clarity. And I mean, even though those places are giving them wrong answers, they're giving them answers. They're giving them clarity. It's bad clarity, but it's clarity. And so there's a way that feels comforting, and there's a way that feels, attractive.
All right, so let's jump into some of your work, man, because I mean, these are brilliant. And so how are you effectuating this? I mean, I think Chirag and I are totally moved and aligned with the work that you're doing. Maybe we can get a little bit deeper into how you're making this happen. I mean, how are you
Yeah.
doing this?
Yeah. So, I'm still kind of at the beginning of my journey. I do consider this my life's work, and I've kind of always worked with youth and with teens, but I'm putting it more at the center of what I do. And so I'm doing that through two ways. I'm doing it in person through the Sailor Sea School. And, we're creating a lot of really cool programs where, I mean, it's all about, transformation through nature, understanding of who we are within the context of nature. And I think that's a whole other topic that I think is really juicy as well. That, when we're talking about education, I mean, putting nature integrated into our educational system, I would love to see, because I think that nature is really the great teacher. And I think it's the great context, right? Because if you don't really understand nature, if you don't really understand your place within it, I mean, how are you really understanding life on Earth? How are you really understanding who you are? Because it is the ultimate context. It's inescapable. But we're doing a lot of programs where we're trying to create, like teen wilderness retreats, conversation communities, places where teens can get inspiration, where they can get connection, both through role models like myself and like a lot of the really awesome people I work with, but also connections to each other through like-minded peers, and then connection to themselves, like on a very deep level. Because I feel like, once again, talking about education, like connection is really the goal, right? The information is secondary, right? The information is only useful if it supports the connection. What we really want is for teens to create connection, because you can listen to a really good lecture and then, a week later, like it didn't really change your life, right? But if you form connections change lives. That is actually the heart of transformation. So we're doing a lot of good work there. I'm really a big fan of the Sailor Sea School, and Amy and all the people who I work with are just absolutely amazing. But then I'm also starting my own life coaching business where I'm working one-on-one with teens. Eventually I'll be doing group coaching and workshops and courses and all kinds of things. I've got a lot planned for the future. Sorry, I had to move my cat. But I think that, in terms of how am I trying to effectuate that change in my own thing, really through creating partnerships, really through like my job as a coach is to make myself obsolete. So I don't want to be the coach who like mentors young people and tells them, hey, this is probably what you should do, and this is what you should think, and this is how you should feel about this. But my goal is really to help them cultivate the coach within, to cultivate their own, like once again, to make myself obsolete so that like when I leave that person, they are not without the same sort of wisdom, belief, confidence that I was hopefully, bestowing upon them. Like they now have that inside of themselves and they have it with them through their whole lives. So yeah, it's a lot about partnering. It's a lot about listening. It's a lot about deep connection and actually growing the person that they need to become kind of from within.
I want to go back to the whole nature thing.
Yeah.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot recently as well. And Sune and I have talked about this. Like, I think we've both been trying to get out more into nature, and it kind of changes your whole perspective, right? Like, even when
Mhm.
you're struggling with something, some thoughts or something, and you just go out for a walk. I've taken to using, still with technology, but I'm trying to avoid technology when I go for walks. But, just using a voice recording app and just talking to it, either talking through ideas or whatever the case may be. And just, it's amazing what just getting out into nature, moving your body, and what that can do for your brain, and freeing up thoughts, and just opening your mind a little bit, right? Just that change of environment from being inside or at your desk or whatever it is. Just going for a simple act of going for a walk. And people have been doing this for thousands of years, right? I mean, I think all the Greek philosophers even talked about this. But yeah, I love that concept. And yeah, how can we kind of incorporate that into our education system? I don't know if it's ready for it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, first of all, what you said reminds me of a quote by Bill Mollison, who's kind of like quote unquote founder of permaculture from Australia. He said, let's see, while the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions are embarrassingly simple.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
And
so good.
so, I mean,
Good.
we think like, oh man, like how do we solve the mental health crisis? How do we, how do we alleviate burnout? How do we deal with like all of this, pressure that young people like? I mean, so much of it really can be answered by take a walk outside. And it doesn't have to be deep wilderness. I mean, deep wilderness is incredibly transformative. And so I encourage everybody to get out into actually wild spaces. But it could be a stroll through your residential neighborhood. It could be a walk in the park. A forest is really great. especially if you can find a place that's kind of private and quiet. It doesn't even have to be the most idyllic landscape ever, but if it can be kind of your place or just a place where you can drop it all. And, it reminds me that a lot of what young people need is what we all need. And so we all need ways to reduce the chaos and noise and clutter in our minds, because it does allow our best work, our best insights, our most wise connections to form in our mind. It allows us to pivot, to reflect, to redirect our energy. So yeah, how does the educational system fit that? I mean, it is tricky, right? Because like we have built our education system around these buildings. And some schools do have a little nature area outside of it. And I would love to see, like, with all new development of schools, I know that like some zoning laws will say things like this, where it's like, okay, 50% of this residential development will go to creating houses and sidewalks, but 50% has to be green spaces. And I think that, going forward, that might be a really cool model where it's like, hey, we're going to create a school. Let's also create a green space adjacent to it. And then let's integrate our daily lessons, or, even if it's not daily, but like we'll have a weekly practice, or we'll have a daily, practice or whatever it is, where teachers are getting the students out there. I mean, I think that it could really assist the learning process, honestly, because if you just sit in that same environment all day, it grows really stale. And so if like, hey, there's this lecture or there's this project that we could do outside, I mean, I say, why not? But I think, it starts just by announcing the importance and the priority of it, that, a lot of times nature is just totally forgotten about, right? I mean, nature and the wilderness and other species, I mean, we live in such this human-dominated world. So I think first we have to announce our priority that nature, it matters for so many reasons, but, you can even be a cold, hard realist, and it still matters. It's still the cheapest solution. It's still one of the most effective solutions. So pragmatist or dreamer, doesn't really matter. We need nature. And I don't know. I mean, I think that if we start with that premise and if we start with that priority, we'll be able to figure out the solutions. Because like I said, I mean, they're not really that complicated.
Yeah. And how much can we tie back a lot of our modern problems to our disconnection from nature, right? Like, look, I'm not a dreamer. Like, there's no going back, right? The Pandora's box is open.
No,
We're not going back to being hunter gatherers or anything. But
totally.
yeah. I mean, mental health, obesity. I mean, so many of our these problems that have only really happened in the past 50 to 100 years can be tied back to our disconnection from nature, right? So yeah, I think anything we can do to grasp at, clinging to some of that, I think can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and totally. Like you said, it's not about going back. It's not about, oh, we have to, everybody, give up your iPhones. It is balance, right? And right now, if you look at our situation, we don't have balance. And nature is one of the best ways to provide that balance. And so, we can all have nature and we can all have Netflix. Like it doesn't have to be either or, it can very much be both and.
I love it. I don't know. I couldn't help but think a bit about how we got here, and understanding how we got here may give us some clues into what we can do to improve the situation that we're talking about. And I keep going back to our education system being really, curated during the Industrial Revolution. And I can't help but use the word institutionalized. That
Sure.
We had a capitalistic system that was focused on factories and manufacturing, and we needed workers that understood how to operate in that type of a society. And it's embarrassing, honestly. We all have to be honest about how embarrassing it is that we have not been able to come together as a country and fix our education system for these decades as we started. And so, fuck it. Like, let's do it now. Like, let's have this conversation, and let's all start making incremental improvements as you're doing, as we're trying to do, because nobody, like, who are we waiting for? Like, what else is left to say, well, someone else's problem? No, it's our problem. Like, we have to fix this. So The nature piece makes tremendous sense to me. And I think of what are the friction points in trying to get recess to become a larger part of the school day, if we're looking at incremental improvements. And it has to be a realization that recess is important as the actual knowledge that we are teaching our children. And so then the question comes, well, what do you compromise? And I think a lot of that comes to what we're talking about here, is that the information and the base knowledge is becoming easier to access. And the way in which we teach multiplication, the way in which we teach grammar, the way in which we teach history doesn't have to be the way that we used to teach it. We don't have to spend as much time memorizing dates and facts and rote information. No, we need to learn how to use AI to get us those facts. We need to instill the right values and lessons that were learned from history quickly and say, this is what it means. And this is why this war started. This is why this war ended. This is why it lasted this long, and keep progressing those conversations. And then say, great, now let's go outside and play and integrate and relate the play outside with the content that we just shared in terms of education. So I don't know. I got a little excited there to think like, well, this is it. Like, this is the moment. Like we like.
Yeah. And let me add on to that a little bit. What you said, Sune, focusing, like allowing more time for recess really got me to thinking, like my kids will come home sometimes with a half-eaten or barely eaten lunch, and I'll ask, "Why didn't you eat your lunch?" And they're like, "I didn't have time." Like they get like it just everything is so regimented, and I don't know if it's gotten worse over the years. I honestly don't remember being rushed through lunch when I was a kid. So I think it is. I think it has gotten worse, and it's so regimented. And these kids have maybe 20 minutes for lunch, and they don't have enough time to socialize with their other, other students and play with each other. And it just feels like what are we doing here, right? Like, why are we so focused on this kind of really regimented approach? And going back to Sinead, what you said, that it all comes from the Industrial Revolution. Like, we're still stuck in this system. So, I mean, I think we definitely need to make a push to get out of that. But it's such a huge challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is sort of the great question with AI, right? Is it ultimately frees up time? What are we going to do with this new gift of time? And I've noticed the same thing with my son who's in third grade, is that, same exact scenario. I'm like, dude, why didn't you eat? He's like, I didn't have time. And he says that frequently. And at first I kind of thought, like, come on, like he's just not focusing. But you're right. Like you're obviously going to socialize a bit, it's going to take time to get settled in. Like, and if they're not having that time to kind of decompress, they're not even going to be as effective going back into the classroom anyways. And, like you said, Sune, I mean, there's so much that we don't need to do that we used to. I don't know if we needed to exactly, but it maybe made more sense in previous generations. But there is so much that is becoming irrelevant. And I'm not the one who says, oh, we shouldn't, it's like, just because you have a calculator, you don't stop teaching math, right? And so just because we have large language models, we don't stop teaching writing. And I think it's important that young people are actually doing these kind of old skills, but we don't have to spend as much time doing them. And they're not quite as important because we kind of want to graduate them to higher level thinking, more strategic thinking, creativity, problem solving. I mean, those are the things that are going to be needed, as well as the ability, like I said earlier, of like being able to curate and discern from the massive amount of information out there. So yeah, I would love to see us re-divert some of the time that we can save on some of the classic subjects, re-divert that to, some play, some conversations, socialization and connection, like that is guided by adults in the room. I would love to see more adults from the community incorporated into the classroom. I would love to see the classroom incorporated more into the community. I would love to see more real world projects where teens especially are going out into the world as part of their curriculum. They are creating projects and they are executing projects that have an actual impact in the world. going back to the rites of passage thing, where our young people kind of become adults without ever becoming adults, right? And we wonder, like, man, why are they still lost at 25? Like, well, we never really gave them, the keys to become a fully functioning member of society. It's almost by accident. It's like, well, eventually we got there, but it was sloppy. And man, I was depressed and emotional eating and who knows, right? So like, we can, I think, make this process a lot simpler and smoother and more sensible through this huge transformation with AI. But we have to be intentional about what we're doing. Otherwise, I mean, you see what happens with technological advances like social media, like the internet. I mean, it brings a lot of gifts, but it brings a whole lot of curses as well. And but yeah, going back to like the rites of passage thing, like if teens were actually involved in their communities and they were actually creating change in their communities, that gives them identity, that gives them agency, and that gives them a model going forward, a confidence where, oh, you know what? I can influence things. I can create things. I can shape things. So I don't know. I guess that's a
All
bunch
right.
of spaghetti on the wall, but
No, I got another direction to take this, because
yeah.
we think about why did the education system change with the Industrial Revolution? Because it was for the economic growth of our country. It was viewed
Mm-hmm.
as somewhat patriotic, right? Like, we
Sure.
needed these workers, we wanted them to stay in the US, and we wanted to, build this engine or flywheel that continues to propagate success within our country, build a middle class, have high
Mm-hmm.
functioning societies, have vertical mobility, all that stuff that we talk about with a functioning democracy. And you look at what's happened within our bias towards capitalism. I'm going to say it, right? Like, we're all going to talk about it. And the example like you gave of what are we going to do with the time that technology is going to give us? We know what capitalistic societies do with time that's given. They optimize it for the benefit of financial gain for their institution, for their system. And so, great, like, we've got self-driving cars. Now I can, focus on thinking about what I'm going to make my kids for dinner that night. No, now I can do an email in my car while my car drives me over to work, or, I can reschedule this next meeting, or I can crunch even more productivity for my job into this little time that I have, instead of it being a time to, hey, think about driving a car and what great creativity and what great thoughts we had because we were just in our own space for a few minutes, and how important that time was when we were commuting and riding a train and not doing anything. Like, the idle mind creates and supports brilliant curiosity and great thoughts that lead to great insights. And so I wonder how we, as the adults, as we've been talking about, can be dogmatic about the need for us to say, hey, this time is my time. It's my individual time. It's not my job's time. It's not my institution's time. It's not the government's time. It's not anybody else's time, but my time. And we haven't done that. We haven't drawn that line in the sand and say, enough is enough. I should still be able to make a good living. I should still be able to work a job that has reasonable commitments and reasonable hours, and not be penalized for drawing that line in the sand and saying, I'm going to take care of my family, and I'm going to take care of my society and my community. And you know what? I'm going to volunteer at the school, and I'm going to go to my kids' book club that they're having and talk to that teacher and add my values. You know what? I'm going to say our school needs a career day so children see what are the careers that others in the world are aspiring to. Well, how did they end up on that track? When was the last time any one of us did a career day at school? Like,
Right.
come on. Like, it's enough. Like, this is the line in the sand, and we got to start giving back to our community, our society, and it's going to solve, and nature, as we've talked about. And it's time. It's time. It's enough is enough.
Yeah, like I said earlier, so much of what we need is what teens need, and so much of what teens need is what we need. And so, when you look at young people and education and this opening up of time, I do worry that that doesn't get directed towards those higher means, because we are so economic and calculated in our thinking a lot of times, which just kind of drives me crazy. Because even if you're economic, like the nature piece, like even if you're cold, hard, economical about it, it still makes sense, right? To invest more time into play into relationships. I mean, like these things are just good for society, mental health. Like these things are good on an individual level, but they're good for all of society too. And so, yeah, it's like, what do we as adults, what do we do with our time in the wake of AI, right? And I do worry that like you mentioned the word optimize, like I feel like that's kind of a word that gets thrown around in a positive sense. Like I'm trying to optimize my life, but it just sounds so, once again, desperate, right? It's just, there's so much pressure behind that word. Like, do we have to optimize our lives? Like we're still organisms, right? Like at the end of the day, we're organisms. Inside every human being is a pile of guts. You know what I mean? We've got blood coursing through our veins. We are organisms. And so like we're not machines to be optimized. You know, we are still living creatures. And I think that we need to reincorporate some of the basics of what it means to be a living creature, you know, and not optimize everything. But, you know, once again, if you just want to focus on data, if you just want to focus on scientific understanding, you're still going to come to the same conclusions that relationships matter more than anything, that like community involvement is one of the, you know, the greatest ways that, you know, you can get engagement and buy-in and change for the least amount of money, you know. I don't know. It's so interesting, and I worry about how we're rolling out AI because it's just kind of being funneled into this, you know, corporate arms race, right, between Google and Meta and OpenAI, and it's sort of the same kind of dogfight of like who's going to win, who's going to roll out their products to the market the most quickly. Ezra Klein mentioned an idea about like, well, what if we had $1 billion prize for, you know, who comes up with the most helpful to society use of AI? You know, like instead of just like waiting and sitting back. I mean, there's a lot of money, right? There's a lot of money in the government. There's a lot of money in society. Why don't we put our money where our mouth is, right? Why don't we actually make it make sense economically for companies to be focused on more than just the bottom line? I don't know. Just a bunch of ideas once again. I mean, I really don't know how this is all going to take shape. I really don't know if we're going to look back at this as the moment we bungled, or if it's like the moment we finally figured it all out. I suspect it'll be a combination of the two, right? Where it'll be kind of like, man, we really got some things right. And man, we really took things to a darker place at the same time.
It goes back to the earlier part of the conversation where we have to have the confidence with and conviction with what we believe the right way to shape the future. And then we have to spread our message with our confidence. And I think we do that in all the ways that we've talked about on the pod. And it's at a small micro scale level. Go walk around, go get involved in your schools, go get involved in your community. And those basic first principles, if you want to be the corporate guy like we have, right? Like if you just go back to first principles of living your life, being a good citizen, maybe another topic for a whole day, but I think another really interesting, you know, kind of trend break would be like how the church used to be the center of a community and a society when religion was, you know, much more adopted within our societies. And I'll just think, even when you look at town structures, when I look at the structure of my little town that I live in, the church was the central congregating point by physical, you know, design. And the rest of the buildings, the shops, the houses were all designed around the center there. As diversity has increased, as our world and our societies have changed, of course, a limited number of people were congregating there. And then so you have diversion, you have isolation, you have, you know, this kind of like, hey, uncertainty, fear even at times. And that only gets reestablished through focusing back in the community. So I think, you know, we can spend time on the things that Chirag and I are doing. I know one of the things that I found personally most rewarding that I started this year was I joined our town's Economic Development Council. And it's been the most rewarding experience that I've had all year so far of trying to see why are these, you know, shops stuck, and using the knowledge that I've gained through my life in corporate America to try to bring back to the town. And it's possible, like you said, go for a walk, get a pet, get a dog. It'll force you to go outside. Like if you need an excuse to get out, there's all these little things that I feel like we can change in our life to put us on a better, happier path and ensure that as AI propagates and we have opportunities to impact how AI propagates and impacts society, that we're making good choices about it and we're being responsible and having good dialogues and discourse of insisting on the development of it in a safe, responsible, and productive way for all, not just the few corporations that are developing the technology.
Yeah, I think that local is huge, and we're kind of, sorry, my cat's like climbing all around me, but speaking of cats, I think that oftentimes we're so nationally and globally focused these days, like whether it's politics or economics or the news cycle. I mean, we're and part of it is like the erosion of local journalism, and part of it is, like you said, that there's not really these clear town centers where everybody congregates, right? Like we've kind of just spread apart, literally and figuratively. But local is just so huge, and enough micro leads to macro. Enough small leads to big, right? And ultimately, especially with young people, like you're probably not going to be able to scale up a situation where young people are able to make a national or global impact, right? Like that's just not realistic. But you can absolutely scale up a situation where young people are making positive changes very locally. You're not changing the world, you're changing your world. But if we're all changing our world, that's the world, right? And so I think that there is a resurgence of this understanding, and I think that there is a lot of renewed focus on in-person environments. There's a lot of renewed focus on local communities. We need to be less obsessed with what's going on in Washington, D.C., or what's going on, in, far-flung corners. Like we don't need to obsess over the worst things that are happening in the world. Like it's good to be aware. It's good to be mobilized towards the good. But at the end of the day, we need to really be taking action super close to home, even in our own homes, even in our own little neighborhoods. It doesn't even have to be at the community level. Affect somebody who lives with you, affect somebody who lives right next to you. Like doing good deeds is an action that adds up and matters,
Can I share two quick stories, Jared, to
Yeah,
that?
please.
All right. So one is one of our neighbors, Kirsten, give her a shout. She had a very similar idea to you of let's start a dinner club. And so her New Year's resolution, as we talked during the holidays, was she's going to work with our local church. We've got like 4. I don't know. We've got a lot of little churches in the town, and not make it a religious thing, but they have an open space that's free. And we organized, organized the first dinner club of about 20 different families. Everybody brought a dish. It was like a Sunday afternoon. The Eagles playoff game was on, in fact. And we still had folks that are interested in football and want to talk about it showed up. And it wasn't a lot of work, but it gave us all an interaction point. It wasn't religious. It was just a bunch of neighbors, black, white, Indian, like all different nationalities came together. She's mixed race. My kids are mixed race. Like just chatted, had meals, and it was a bit awkward. It was definitely awkward, uncomfortable. And, but who had the most fun? The kids. The kids had the most fun. And shout out to the church pastor, because he's an Eagles fan, left the Eagles playoff game and was having and playing games with the kids, organized games, had set up games, and put that effort on himself through no benefit or value to the church. Random acts of kindness with no intent for reciprocity. And it was such a brilliant event. It was great. And it hits home with, it's not expensive. Nobody had to go out of their pocket. It was a minimal amount of time. And no reason, there really is no excuses why we can't have a viral movement of this across every town across our country. There's no reason it can't happen. Just need leaders that are passionate and want to do a little bit of work to fix. Sacrifice 5 hours a month. You can make this happen. 5 hours a month, an hour a week is not a lot of time. Put that time towards our community. We're all going to see macro benefits, to your point. So that was one. Second quick story was, shout out to Miss Fleischer, my daughter's 4th grade teacher. I think she's doing all these little things that you talked about, even being institutionalized. She
Hmm.
tries to get an extra recess out with the kids. So my daughter and I had the same experience with the kids in lunches. It doesn't even change in high school. They feel rushed
Ah.
through it. It's not a good experience. We need to change that. That is something we can absolutely 100% change. We have to.
Hmm.
I don't see how that's controversial. But shout out to Miss Fleischer for doing what she can in between to get the kids outside more. And she abandoned the kind of conventional classroom setting. She's got little poofs in the classroom. Kids can go under her desk and bring a blanket and like just little things like she does like that. And she does time after school and does book clubs, volunteer book clubs. And she brings parents in. So I went in and I did it. And again, another one of those rewarding experiences where I'm around
Hmm.
5, 6 kids. They love reading. They love talking about it. She asked me a question. I engaged with them. One of the most rewarding things I did in the entire day. So we're doing it. Like, it's not like Chirag and I just talk about this shit and don't do anything. Like, if we can do it, anybody can do it. If you can do what you do, anybody can do what you do. It doesn't,
Hmm.
we can build rallies and we need to talk more about it. So thank you
Yeah.
for the time to share those two stories.
Yeah, that reminds me, I've got a little local story too that when my oldest son was, I think, 2, we lived in this, it was like an old kind of, used to be a farmhouse, but built up around it now was a bunch of residences. So this is just kind of like in the midst of a town, residential area. And it had these fruit trees that were, from a long time ago, and they were very productive still. And so there was just gobs and gobs of fruit that, apples and plums and all kinds of stuff, right? And so it was really awesome. We loved it, but there was far more food than we could possibly have eaten. And so we took a bunch to like this it's kind of like a food bank, but it's like an elevated like membership food bank. They're trying to do their own little thing. But another thing we did is my son and I, we got a wagon and we just put a bunch of fresh fruit in the back of his wagon, and we walked door to door throughout our neighborhood. And we hadn't been there for very long. I mean, I think we'd been there, I don't know, a couple months or something. And so like we knew a couple of our neighbors, but it's kind of weird, like you're living close to people and you might see them get in their car, but you just don't really converse. So we just went door to door, like knock, knock. Hey, like we got some fresh fruit. Do you want some fresh fruit? And a few people were definitely a little bit like suspicious at first. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, we live at that old farmhouse, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I would love some fruit. And to be honest, I mean, that day I was sort of like, do my neighbors probably think like we're the crazy people now? But what was cool is that week we had like 3 or 4 different neighbors knock on our door, and like, somebody had made a card and somebody else had like something from their garden and they had shared it with us. And so like all of these, like just from this one little action we took, like it totally changed. We only lived in this spot for a year, but it changed our dynamic. All of a sudden, like, we'd walk down the sidewalk and it'd be a conversation where it used to just be, barely eye contact, and people invited us into their houses, and, it was amazing.
Love it. So
Fantastic. You really create a ripple effect, right? By
Mm-hmm.
these what we think are small actions, but they can kind of add up and compound and make, make such an effect on other people.
Mm-hmm.
all right, I think we've got so much that we could keep talking about, Jared. We've
Totally.
we've hit the hour mark. This was amazing. So much of a roller coaster of our conversations and different topics that we touched on, and just so grateful that our paths crossed and we got the opportunity to have a conversation like this with you. Be able to share some of our stuff, share some of your stuff, and get more folks talking about this stuff. I think if we can, then I think this time that we spent together will have been more than worth it. Not just for the personal sort of endorphin high that I got from the conversation, but more broadly beyond that, to create more ripples in the ocean to build a better world for all of us. So thank you so much, Chirag. I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to share, but I got this quote from MLK that I'd love to close on when you're ready.
Yeah, no, go for it. Thank you, Jared. This is a fantastic conversation, like Sine said. And yeah, we'd love to have you back. Maybe we can have you back and maybe dig into one of these topics that we talked about in more detail.
Oh yeah. No, I love conversing with you guys. I'm always down.
All right, here it is. I'm reading the autobiography of MLK, so I thought an MLK quote would be a
Yep.
pretty cool way to wrap us and put some of this together. So he says, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education, and that's MLK. So thanks again. Look forward to chatting more. I think that's the pod.
That's a pod. Thanks, everyone. Until next time.
Thanks.
See ya. Bye.